Thank you for tuning in to the Postmodern Realities podcast, brought to you by the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. I'm Melanie Cogdill, managing editor of the Christian Research Journal. You're listening to episode 30, which is a conversation about evangelizing cultural Christians. Are cultural Christians saved? Today's guest is Dr. Clay Jones, who is a visiting scholar for the Masters in Christian Apologetics program at Talbot Seminary. He's the chairman of the board of Ratio Christi, a university apologetics ministry, and he's also the author of the book Immortal: How the Fear of Death Drives Us and What We Can Do About It. Clay has written an article for our Effective Evangelism column, which is a practical advice column on how to reach people of other faiths and of no faith with the gospel. Our authors share general tips on how to reach these people, or explore a particular evangelistic method that has proven effective, or they focus on how to overcome a particular challenge that often comes up with that group. Clay's article is called Evangelizing the Cultural Christian, and you can read it for free at our website, equip.org. Clay, it's good to have you on.
Thank you, Melanie. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, it seems like if you ask the average American, are you a Christian? The answer is yes, and that can have so many meanings to people. And so how would you describe a cultural Christian, and how many Americans do you think are cultural Christians or nominal Christians?
Well, this is such a big issue to me, and I think part of the thing is because I've now been a Christian. It's kind of shocking, but I've been a Christian since 1969, and so I've had a chance to watch this whole cultural Christian phenomenon. And plus, as I mentioned in the article, my family considered themselves Christians before they actually became Christians, and so the cultural Christian, you have a lot of people that like Christianity for almost like joining a country club, or they see it as fire insurance. It's like, yeah, just pray this prayer and you'll be saved. And so a lot of people have gotten on board, and I've heard people, as a matter of fact, say things like this. As one young person puts this, who wouldn't want to be a Christian? It's just, you can just live a full life here, and then you get to go to heaven when you die. In other words, heaven is just something that happens then. Heaven's guaranteed because you prayed the prayer, and you're in. And I think that's, obviously, so you have a lot of people that claim to be Christians, and frankly, they're just simply, they've never really become born again. They've never become obedient from the heart. They've never decided to do God's will. And there are, as you said, the second part, how many are there? A lot of people. Well, when you think, there was a Pew study just a few years ago, in fact, 2015, of 35,000 Americans. So this is not a small study, and it concluded that 70.6% of Americans identify themselves as Christians, and then of that, about 55% of those who identify themselves as Christians would qualify to be in the category of evangelical. Well, that's just a gigantic amount of people, right, that are self-identifying as being Christians. And so there's a lot of people who are in the culture, and unfortunately I think we've done some things like basically pray this prayer, and I talk about this in the article, pray this prayer and you'll be saved. And so they go, okay, great, I'll just pray this prayer, now I'm in. And frankly, when I was a younger Christian and when I was a sincere Christian, I'd tell people, pray this prayer and you'll be saved, and don't doubt it after that because you're just saved. Well, unfortunately, I think that now is a false gospel, and I think some people are going to be horrified to hear that, but I think that's a false gospel. So anyway, we have a lot of people in this category.
Now, you mentioned that you've been a Christian for a long time. You became a Christian in 1969. So prior to becoming a Christian, what was your pre-Christian experience with cultural Christianity?
Well, as I say, as I mentioned in the article, it's strange, but growing up, my father was a hard-drinking womanizer, and I remember having Altheiser's book, The Death of God, on his shelf, and he had nothing. He thought that any kind of serious Christianity was just nonsense. On the other hand, my mother was into the occult, and taught me to here's how palm reading works, and taught me to use a Ouija board, and took me to Buddhist temples, and was into astrology. And I don't mean like she just read our horoscopes. I mean it was your moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter's aligned with Mars. But in this, strangely, with my dad being a hard-drinking, womanizing, hardly around kind of guy, and my mom being into the occult, we also attended the United Methodist Church every Sunday. And if you'd said, "Are you a Christian?" we would have all said yes. But by that we would have meant, well, we're not Buddhists. I mean, what else would you be? Of course we're Christians. We're not Buddhists. We're not Muslims. I mean, the question would almost be nonsensical to us, even though there was nothing in real relationship with Jesus at that time. There was zero.
I think there's a sense, when, like you said, if you talk to people and they say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," and you know something about their lives, and you think, well, really? Do you follow Christ? Do you understand the Bible? How has the existence of nominal Christians, people think, "Oh, yeah, I grew up in the church, so I'm a Christian." How do you think that's damaged, true Christian witness?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think it's been, well, I won't say devastating, because the true gospel comes out no matter what, but it's damaging, because people, non-Christians, those who don't identify as being Christians whatsoever, look at the nominal Christian and they think, "I can't see any difference in your life from anybody else other than you call yourself a Christian." And so you can have people, basically they spend their money just like any non-Christian. They're just as selfish as any non-Christian who self-identifies as a non-Christian. They're watching basically the same TV shows, basically almost pornography, if not pornography, and still calling themselves a Christian. They don't care really for any Christian witness. They don't spend money on Christian, to support Christian causes. As you know, I'm sure you know, Melanie, the amount of money the average Christian gives a church is negligible. Hardly anything. And as a result, and when it comes to their every aspect of their political life, all their political beliefs are just simply worldly. And so the non-Christian looks at them and says, "I don't see anything different in you whatsoever. And you want me to become like that?" I'm reminded Mark Twain once defined a Christian, Mark Twain, who was no Christian, by the way, even remotely, once defined a Christian as an initial spasm followed by chronic inertia. And I think for so many people who self-identify as Christian, they kind of go, "Oh, yeah, well, I'm a Christian now." But their daily basic life is unchanged. There's nothing different about them at all. They may now attend church. And I'm sadly, and I don't think, to take this a step even further, I think an awful lot of people who are attending evangelical churches and who say they're Christians aren't. They're just really not Christians. Because, like I say, and you mentioned this a little bit, when it comes to reading the Bible, they don't. When it comes to praying, they don't. They may put $10 in the basket when it goes by, which of course is almost nothing. But in every aspect of their life, you sit there and you look at them and you go, they really haven't decided to conform their lives to Jesus. That's just simply not there. That, again, it's just fire insurance. And so non-Christians look at this and they go, you're just a mess. And then when it comes to divorce rate, one of the things that, everybody talks about, well, the divorce rate among evangelicals is similar to that of non-Christians. Well, that's because those who even consider themselves evangelicals, many of them are just simply cultural Christians. Also, a strange thing, I hadn't thought of saying this, but I think it relates pretty well. One of the trouble with Holocaust studies, and as I think you know, I've spent a lot of time on genocide studies, is when they would interview people on why some rescued Jews and others didn't rescue Jews, is the overwhelming number of Germans self-identified as being Christians. And as a result, they can't find a correlation between Christians rescuing Jews and Christians not rescuing Jews. They found no correlation. Well, that doesn't, for those that really understand this, that's not a surprise. Of course, Germany, by the time World War II came around, was a disaster Christian-wise because of higher criticism and Boltzmann and a lot of these German theologians coming in and influencing and basically gutting the truth of Christianity. But most people, most Germans would self-identify as being Christians. But then when they look at it, they go, well, Christians don't save Jews any more than those who identify as non-Christians. Well, like I say, for those who recognize that just because you call yourself a Christian doesn't mean you are a Christian, for those who recognize this truth, that makes perfect sense because most of the people who called themselves Christians weren't.
You're listening to the Postmodern Realities podcast from the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. Today's guest is Clay Jones, who has written an article for our Effective Evangelism column called Evangelizing the Cultural Christian for the volume 40, number 1 issue of the Christian Research Journal. So his article is in a very special issue of the journal. It's only available as a thank you gift for your donation to the ongoing work of the Christian Research Institute. So to donate and receive this issue, please go to equip.org. We're just kind of talking about, just how cultural Christians has damaged the Christian witness. What do you think are some of the biggest reasons that so many Americans believe that they're Christians when they're not? Right now, CRI is located in the South, so before we were in California, which is kind of different culturally, and now we're in the Bible Belt. So as I meet people, I assumed that everyone that I would meet who would call themselves a Christian was really devoted, really passionate about their faith, and I've really come to find that so many people go to church because it's tradition, or their family's always done it, or they've grown up in the South, or whatever. So what are some reasons you think that Americans think that they're Christians when they're really nominal?
Well, of course, you're much more familiar with the Bible Belt Christians than I am actually living there. But here's where I'm going to step on some toes, but I'm okay with that. And it is, we have actually, as I said a little earlier, just mentioned, we've preached a false gospel. Many Christians have. And the false gospel is, pray this prayer and you'll be saved. The sinner's prayer it has never saved anyone in the history of Christianity. And I did a radio show many years ago, and I did that. Our topic was, our contention today is the sinner's prayer has never saved anyone. If you disagree, give us a call. And all the lines lit up, and people are like, what? How can you possibly say that? And I just reply, that's right. The sinner's prayer has never saved anyone, not even once in the entire history of Christianity. And people were shocked. I mean, just unbelieving. And then I would say to them, and I mentioned this part in the article, I'd say to them, well, for by grace you've been saved through, and they I remember the first caller goes, faith? Yes, faith. You're saved by faith. You're not saved by praying the sinner's prayer. And a lot of people don't realize this, that the prayer doesn't save. Now, people may think from this that I'm opposed to the sinner's prayer. I am not. I've prayed the sinner's prayer with people, and I hope to pray it with them again. But the prayer doesn't save. The prayer is just simply an act of commitment and recognition before God of your being a sinner and confession. But you're saved by faith, and the sinner's prayer is a good thing to do for someone who has come to faith, but the prayer itself doesn't save you. And as a result, because people have taught this, I've heard many people say, well, my 18-year-old teenager is living with his girlfriend, and he's using drugs, and he never goes to church, and he couldn't care less about Christianity, but he prayed the prayer when he was 12, and I know he's saved. And it's, no. Wrong. You actually have to have ongoing faith in Jesus to be saved. You can't have had an initial spasm and kind of go, well, yeah, it was true, I believe it, but not really ever change your life or live in conformity to Jesus. That's just crazy talk. But you find that a lot, and frankly, as I said, and I'm embarrassed about this and I repent of it, when I was a younger Christian many years ago, I would tell people, pray this prayer and you'll be saved. That's just simply not. That's just simply false, but we've told a lot of people this, and so they believed a false gospel.
You're listening to episode 30 of the Postmodern Realities podcast. Today's guest, Dr. Clay Jones, has written an article for us called Evangelizing the Cultural Christian. You can read it for free at our website, equip.org. In addition, You can partner with us by subscribing to our print magazine for $33.50, which you can also do at our website, equip.org. And if a subscription is not in your budget this month, you can leave us a tip for $3 or $5 or $10, something that helps us continue to bring this content to you and help us to make our budget to be able to pay for articles like the one that Clay has written for us. And the other way that you can help us out, which is no cost but your time, is to write us a review at Apple Podcasts. Either click a star reviewed very quickly or write a brief sentence about why you enjoy tuning in. And thank you for your support. So what do you think we can do to evangelize and reach, nominal Christians who are presupposing that they are already saved?
Well, it's, first of all, we need to hear, of course, where they are at, because everybody's coming to this from a very different position. And so we need to understand them. We don't want to just start running off and assuming that they are, or wherever they are, and then address it. We need to find out where they are. But then after that, we need to start telling them the truth. And one of them is, as I just mentioned, we need to tell them, you're not saved by praying the prayer. You're saved by faith. And then I think to take it a step further, we need to tell them, and faith means you're going to change your life. I'm not talking, of course, about works righteousness. I'm not saying that to be saved you need to do good works. But I am saying, as the Reformers had a maxim, and it was, faith alone saves, but the faith that saves is not alone. And I think we need to point out to people that, you really aren't living. You say you believe this, but you really don't seem to believe it in your very actions, is one of the biggest things that we need to do. I like what Dallas Willard said. He says, a Christian is someone who's decided to stop sinning. I think that's correct. A Christian, by the way, just to clarify, is not necessarily someone who stopped sinning, because then I wouldn't be a Christian for sure, because I sinned a lot, and I'm sure I will again many times. But a Christian is someone who's no longer comfortable living in their sin. A Christian is someone who's decided, I think Jesus really is Lord, and I think we need to do His will, and because He really is coming back. And as Dallas Willard also pointed out, he says, never tell people to live what they believe, because people always live what they believe. And I think that's also true. People live what they believe. And so when you find somebody that's his or her life is no different than a non-Christian's, I think we need to challenge them. When I see people, that have grown up in the church, how many times, if they've gone to an evangelical church, have they been told you should read the Bible regularly, you should pray regularly, and they don't at all. And now when I talk to a congregation about, let's say, Bible study, I say, most of you, if you've been a Christian a long time, you've been told many times that you should read the Bible regularly. If you're not reading the Bible regularly, there's something spiritually wrong with you, and you need to figure out what it is. Because if you keep hearing, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, is what Christians should do, and you don't do it, I think you need to sit down and go, maybe there's something wrong with me spiritually. As Paul says, test yourself, see if you really are in the faith. And in other words, it's just, I call myself a Christian, so I'm in the faith. Well, Paul says to the Corinthians, test yourself, see if you really are in the faith. So and I think basically we need to just challenge people to examine their lives and say, have I ever really decided to do Jesus' will? Or if I just thought, I'm saved because I prayed and that's enough?
Are there any other things that we need to do to, communicate the gospel clearly to a nominal Christian? I also wonder, too, it seems to me like you were talking about the fire insurance, that people don't realize that they're in a relationship with the person of God. And so if you're in a relationship with anyone, in order to deepen that relationship, you're going to need to spend time with them and seek them and seek them out and so forth. But I wonder if people don't really give that much thought. They just think, I don't want to go to hell. So I don't know what other things that you think would be very helpful for us in this regard.
Well, I think what you've just said right there is, extremely helpful to point out, that if your life isn't changed, you need to think that through. What's gone on here? How come there's no relationship? Do you not see this as a relationship? Is this, what's going on? One of the things in John, which troubles a lot of people, but in John, 1 John rather, John says, no one who is born of God continues to sin because God's nature abides in him, and he cannot go on sinning because he's been born of God. John is not saying there that if you've been born again, you're going to try not to, or that you're not going to sin. If you've been truly a Christian, you're not going to sin. What he's saying is, and he's not actually in those verses saying, if you're born again, you should really, really be working on not sinning. Now, we should be trying not to sin as Christians, that's for sure, but that's not what John is saying. John is saying that if you're really born again, that you're not comfortable in sin. If you're really born again, if you really know God and have a relationship with him, you can't be comfortable just simply going on and living a rebellious lifestyle. You're not comfortable there. And this is part of the relationship thing that you mentioned. And I think we just need to point out, are you having this kind of an experience or not? Because if you're not, if this is just a bunch of, I prayed the prayer and I have this vague sense that Jesus really is the Messiah and hey, I got to go watch the movies now, that you need to re-examine yourself and see where are you really. And so I guess what it comes down to is encouraging a sense of examination and are you really in a relationship with Jesus, or is this just a bunch of talk?
Now, you mentioned a little bit ago about the example of the parent who said, well, I heard my kid pray the prayer, so therefore they're a Christian, even though there's no evidence in their life that they even care about God or Christ. So what would you say the person that would disagree with you? They would say, well, my kid prayed the prayer, once saved, always saved, isn't just, assenting to, I believe just Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins enough.
It's interesting. I literally over Japanese food, strangely enough, had a conversation like this just this last week. And one of the things that this mother was saying is, but once they're loved by God, then they're always loved by God. And once they're loved by God, then they're always forgiven, right? And even though, this person's no longer living it, even though this person is in rebellion, even though this person is not even doing it, even remotely anything close to being a Christian, but they were at one time, and that's enough. And part of the thing that, I said about that is, and a lot of people don't understand this, there's this kind of a sense where they've confused Calvinism and Arminianism. And let me put it to you like this, because a lot of people are confused on this. If somebody, I give a worst-case scenarios philosophers like to do. Suppose somebody is running a brothel, and they've hooked all of their prostitutes on drugs, and, this is just a person who's just a depraved person, but this person then becomes a Christian and starts living a changed life, starts going to church, in fact, starts leading worship in the choir, worship team or choir, starts leading worship and gives money and just, from all intents and purposes, we can look at this person and say, wow, they really are saved people. If this person then one day says, Guy, this is just a bunch of hooey, this Christian thing. Yeah, I tried it for a while. It really wasn't for me. I don't believe it now. And they go back and open up a new brothel and hook their new girls, the new girls that work there, on drugs and are pushing drugs and whatnot. Here's what a lot of Christians miss. Calvin would say of this person that they were never saved in the first place, that they really never came to a saving relationship with Jesus. And whatever happened to them was, they kind of maybe tasted of the goodness of God, but they never really became a Christian. Think of the verses in Hebrews 6 and 10. The Arminius, though, would say the person really was saved, but they've lost their salvation. Here's what it seems like so many people are missing out on this, and it is, notice something. Both Calvin and Arminius agreed that this person is not saved. And that's what is missing in this whole thing, because what they've done is they've gone, well, we have the free will of Arminius, but once you become a Christian, then you're saved like a Calvinist. But that is not what Calvin believed, not even remotely, and that's not what Calvinists believe. And thus the word or the letter in tulip, the P in tulip is perseverance, for the perseverance of the saints. that what that means to Calvinists is, for those who are Calvinists, is that means they will continue. They will continue to honor God until they die. And the way you know someone is saved is because they continue to, from a Calvinist perspective, and actually now that I think about it, from an Arminian perspective, is they continue to honor God and walk in God until their very death. Thus Jesus saying, he who endures to the end will be saved. So this kind of notion that, well, he prayed the prayer and so he's saved and now he's always saved, neither Calvin nor Arminius would agree with that. And this is just some sort of terrible notion. In fact, it actually has a name, non-lordship salvation, that you don't actually have to have Jesus be the Lord of your life. If you have the vaguest intellectual assent that Christianity might be true, then you're in. And that's just simply false. And so we need to clarify in people's minds that I don't care whether your 12-year-old prayed the prayer and now they're living lives of utter rebellion. You do not have any confidence that they're saved. In fact, I'll tell you, this is a strange story. Do you have a moment more? Or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm a youth minister at a church of about 5,000 people. This is a long time ago in the early 80s. And this gal, in my college and career group, I was associate pastor in this church, and one of my duties was to run the college and career. This gal in the college and career group came up to me and said, Clay, and I know this is kind of shocking, but she says, Clay, I'm picking up men at bars, and I'm having sex with them, and I'm having the time of my life. Now, that's a strange thing to tell your college pastor, but what I replied to her is, in essence, I said, if Jesus came back tonight, I don't think you'll be saved, because there's such a person who is living in abject rebellion against God, who's still attending church and worshiping, on Sunday mornings, but on Saturday night she's picking up men at bars and having sex with them. This woman should have no confidence whatsoever that she's born again, that she's really saved, because she is living in rebellion. And thus it says in Ephesians chapter 5, let no one deceive you with empty words. No one who is impure or immoral or covetous, such a man as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of God or of Christ. Well, what are the empty words? Well, I'm a Christian just like you. I prayed the prayer when I was 12, so I'm saved. Those are empty words because Paul says no one who is immoral or impure or covetous, such a man as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of God or of Christ. This person should not believe that they're really saved. In fact, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5 that the immoral person, and he says, I don't mean the immoral of this world. He says, because then you'd have to go out of the world. But the person who calls themselves a Christian but is living in rebellion against God, he says, don't even have lunch with such a person. And so these can also turn into hard words often for us when it comes to dealing with those who are cultural Christians but are, cheating on their wives. And actually, I know a situation like this right now. Oh, yeah, I'm a Christian. He's actually been committing adultery and is going to leave his wife for some other woman. And you sit there and you say, yeah, and he thinks he's a Christian. I said, not a chance. In fact, when he told me that, I said, I'm not eating. We were meeting occasionally. I said, I'm not even going to have lunch with you again. We're done. Because you are, and what's the point there, is to encourage him to go, I don't think you're a Christian. You can't cheat on your wife and at the same time say, I'm a Christian. And so, anyway, I really do think there does come a point where we need to say, you know what, you are living in abject rebellion against God. Don't kid yourself by saying you're going to be welcomed into the kingdom of God like this because you're not.
Well, that's a lot of food for thought. So, finally, I want to end with some fun rapid-fire questions for Clay. So, Clay, what do you like on your pizza?
Great question. I like pepperoni, and I like my pizza loaded. I want everything on it, no pineapple. Ugh. I want pepperoni and sausage. You can put on ham, you can put on bacon, bell peppers, onions, lots of cheese, throw it on. That's what I like. I mean, I like everything.
What's the first job you ever had?
I was first non-official job. I pulled weeds for like 50 cents an hour. Boy, it takes you back. And then I was a box boy at a grocery store, making I think $1.68 an hour. That was a long time ago. So that box boy was my first official job.
And besides the Bible, what is a book that you think that every Christian should own?
Oh, I'll tell you, I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan, which you probably hear a lot. But my favorite book in the world is the Screwtape Letters, and of course, by book, I'm not including the Bible in the book category. I love this C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. I've read it, I think, 3 or 4 times. I think it's awesome. Mere Christianity, of course, is awesome. If I was going to say there's 2 books that every single Christian ought to read, I'd read Mere Christianity but other than that, there's, after that, I don't know how to start limiting it down. But those are great books for me. And anything else by Lewis, the Space Trilogy, the Chronicles of Narnia, and so on. I love those.
Well, that's more than one. So what lesson do you think you're still learning after many years?
I'm learning good. It fits into, I'm learning to be holy. I am learning as I'm growing in Jesus on what's really important and what's not. And so I've sensed that the Lord's constantly moving me into a position of being more holy. And I think that could frighten a lot of listeners because they're like, oh man, I'm afraid of that. The Scripture says that in Hebrews 11, He rewards those who diligently seek Him. And as I grow in Christ, if you had said to me when I was a young Christian in 1969 in junior high, hey, you're going to have to do all these things and give up all these things, I would have been like, oh no. But as I keep growing in Jesus, I find, a lot of these things that I thought were important aren't. In fact, not only are they not fun, they're actually hurtful to who I am as a person. And so that's probably where I'm at right now.
Well, thanks, Clay, for being a guest on the Postmodern Realities podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Melanie.
You've been listening to episode 30 of the Postmodern Realities podcast, brought to you by the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. Today's guest is Dr. Clay Jones, who has written an effective evangelism article for us called Evangelizing the Cultural Christian, and you can read it for free at our website, equip.org.